G'day, welcome to the Digger History Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Robinson, and in this episode, I'll be talking about the Imperial Camel Corps. As the name implies, the Imperial Camel Corps was a camel-mounted unit that was raised during World War One for service in the Middle East. It should come as no surprise, really, that camels were chosen as an appropriate um, form of transport for warfare in the Middle East. This was a time really when motor vehicles were quite new and motor vehicles that were designed to travel across deserts weren't really a big thing at the time. So camels and horses were used for quite a few things in the desert campaign of World War One. They were used as for mounted infantry, so as transport to get soldiers into battle. They were used for transporting food and water and other supplies to troops. And the camel had a natural advantage over the horse. Obviously, it was um, better suited to desert conditions, but also it could carry like far more far more weight than a horse could, and it could cover longer distances without food or water. So the camel had a much longer range than the horse. So the Imperial Camel Corps started off as four companies. It was raised in December 1916. There was the Australians were in Egypt at the time. They'd come out of Gallipoli and they were recovering after the Gallipoli campaign, and the Imperial Camel Corps was formed out of from those soldiers. So the stories have it that the the Australian commanders, used this as a way to get rid of some of their um, I guess more troublesome soldiers. How much of this is truth and how much of the story is um is unknown. But yeah, I guess the soldiers like that were put into the Camel Brigade had a bit of a reputation about them. So four companies were formed of Australian Gallipoli veterans. They formed the first battalion of the Imperial Camel Corps, and they were mounted infantry. So the way mounted infantry worked, they're not like cavalry. Cavalry is designed to or trained to fight on horseback, whereas mounted infantry would use the horses as transport to the battle and then dismount and then fight as regular infantry. So the original four companies of Australian Cameliers, they they formed the first battalion of the Imperial Camel Corps, and then after that another three battalions were formed. So the second battalion was a British battalion, the third was another Australian battalion, and the fourth battalion was an ANZAC battalion with New Zealanders and Australians. I actually found it quite interesting to see that so many New Zealanders were in the Imperial Camel Corps. It's not really an animal that you think of when you think of New Zealand, and like as an Australian, there's not camels aren't native to Australia, but there's a lot of them here, and there's a big history of camels being used in the exploration of Australia. But I did find it quite interesting that so many New Zealanders served in the Imperial Camel Corps, and actually, in fact, when I was researching for this podcast, a lot of my information was found from New Zealand sources. Now, at its basic level, the soldiers worked in groups of four. They like the light horse did as well. They had group of four soldiers would patrol together, and when in a battle, the way that mounted infantry worked was they rode to battle, and then they would dismount, and one soldier from every group of four would 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 stay behind and look after the animals for the other three. So for example, that with the light horse, they would dismount, and there'd be one bloke would be a designated horse holder while the other three fought. Now the disadvantage to this was your fighting force was reduced by a quarter every time you went into battle. And interestingly, that's the way it started with the Camel Corps. That they worked the same way as the light horse. One bloke would stay behind to hold four camels, but because the camels' temperament, they weren't so skittish and and flighty with the sounds of the battle. It They ended up having one bloke left behind to look after 12 camels. So the fighting force was increased because they had less blokes left behind holding the camels. So as well as the soldiers that are armed with the Lee Enfield bolt action 303, the standard British um, rifle at the time, each camel company also had a machine gun section with three Lewis machine guns, and as well as that, the brigade also had a camel machine gun squadron that had eight Vickers machine guns. They had a mounted artillery battery, mountain artillery battery. So what a mountain artillery piece is basically a artillery piece that can come apart in pieces so that it can be transported across the mountain. So they'd take these artillery pieces apart, put them on backs of camels, and move them around, then reassemble them. Then the brigade also had its own engineers, the 10th Camel Field Troop, a signal section, a field ambulance, and even its own dental unit. They had four men in the dentist dental unit, and they were there um, for to do dental work on the men. I'm not sure about the camels if they did dental work on the camels as well, but they were there for the men. So they had even had four dentists in the brigade, and it also had its own veterinary unit and logistic units, transport ammunition, to bring like the ammunition and supplies up to the troops. So in total, at its peak, the brigade had over 4,000 soldiers and about 4,800 camels. At any time, one of the four battalions was always resting, and the other three would be in operation, and then they'd rotate through. So there's always one battalion resting. So the Imperial Camel Corps, they started off with long range patrols um, in the Sinai Desert, um, raiding Ottoman outposts and looking after British interests like water and railway lines. But in December 1915, the Imperial Camel Corps went on the offensive with the Egyptian Expeditionary Force. Went on the offensive across the Sinai Desert. 2 days after the Imperial Camel Corps Brigade was formed, um, the Battle of Magdabar, correction, Magdabar. I got a bit tongue-tied with that. On the 23rd of December was the first large battle. The Imperial Camel Corps were involved in the first Battle of Gaza and the second Battle of Gaza in March and April 1917, and then took part in the Battle of Beersheba in October 1917, which is the famous battle with the light horse, when the Australian light horse charged the defences of Beersheba. So all through 1917, the Imperial Camel Corps advanced with the ANZAC mounted um, corps across through the Sinai Desert and eventually entered Palestine. And this kind of saw the beginning of the end for the Imperial Camel Corps. As the terrain changed around the Jordan Valley, it became more suitable for horses, and camels kind of no longer had the advantages they did while during the desert campaign. And eventually in June 1918, the Imperial Camel Corps was disbanded. The Australian troops were used to form the 14th and 15th Light Horse Regiment, and the New Zealand troops formed the 2nd New Zealand Machine Gun Squadron. And these units were part of the 5th Light Horse Brigade. There were six British companies remaining in the Imperial Camel Corps, and they stuck around for a bit longer. They fought with T. Lawrence, commonly known as Lawrence of Arabia, in the Arab Revolt, and carried on like doing sabotage operations on railway lines and infrastructure. But though they weren't disbanded at the time, they never got any reinforcements and were eventually reduced in strength until in May 1919 they were eventually disbanded. So in the 2 years of the Imperial Camel Corps existed, 240 soldiers were killed, 106 of them being British, 84 Australians, 41 New Zealanders, and 9 Indians from India. So there's a quick history of the Imperial Camel Corps. I found it quite interesting researching for this podcast. As I said, the New Zealand contingent actually surprised me that there were so many Kiwis involved. And what I was also fascinated about while I was researching for this is the different ways in which the camels were used. They were like the the multi-purpose vehicle of the time. I saw a picture of the field ambulance camels, and they had these like great big they're almost like wings coming off the camels' humps, and one on each side. There was a stretcher on each side. It reminded me of the the helicopters they used on the TV series MASH. How they had a stretcher on either skid of the helicopter where they evacuate the casualties, and it reminded me a bit of that. They had these great big it was like almost like a sail across the camel's hump with a stretcher on either end with a wounded soldier, and then like there'd be camels with bits of artillery and heavy machine guns and just like these amazing loads that they'd be carrying. And I kind of wonder a lot, like you get attached to the animals that you work with, and I wonder if how the soldiers felt when the Camel Corps was disbanded and they had to hand in their camels and take on horses. So it's quite an interesting little part of our military history, and there's not a real lot about the Camel Corps out there. Like I said, a lot of my research came from New Zealand sources. And camels are quite interesting animals. I have actually ridden a camel. I don't know if you call it riding, but I've been on a camel before. I was in Bathurst one year. They had a charity camel cup, and I was asked to ride this camel in a race. And the name of the camel was Lethal Weapon, and I was the the cat. We won the race. The first race we won through no skill of my own. I can tell you that. I was sitting on this camel just trying to stay on. That's all I was doing. And the camel knew what he was doing. There was a bucket of feed down the end of the at the end of the course, and he was getting to that. So he was just going as fast as he could. But I guess it'd take a special kind of skill to ride a camel and to cross the desert and to fight battles on a camel and to get camels to cooperate and and do what you want them to do. And I often think too, like how many of these soldiers volunteered for the Camel Corps and how many were were shafted into it. Uh, there's stories about the Australian commanders using the Camel Corps to get rid of some of their their difficult soldiers, and maybe there was some truth in that, or maybe been volunteered for it. Maybe they thought, yeah, they loved camels and they wanted to be in the Camel Corps. I did read a couple of accounts from the Cameleers where they'd say they'd call them filthy beasts and they were stinky and rough and ill mannered, but then they'd say how much they missed them and loved them too. So I guess it was a bit of a love hate kind of relationship with them. So there you go. There's my little podcast on the Imperial Camel Corps. I hope you got something out of it and enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions on something to do with Australian military history that you'd like me to do a podcast about, pop a comment in below. And yeah, feel free to add comments. Share this podcast with your friends, subscribe, and yeah, I'll talk to you next time with another subject on digger history. Thank you.